Hi there, and welcome to episode number 9 of the Two Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network. My name's Brian Weeb, your host of the podcast and owner and editor-in-chief of BCHL Network. Sincere thanks for listening to the Two Goal Lead podcast as we are getting closer and closer to celebrating double digits in terms of episodes. The next one after this one will be number 10. Looking forward to that. But we've got someone to look forward to today. In fact, our guest today has worn a lot of hats in the BC Hockey League. He stepped away from the league for 5 seasons, but he's back. It is Fraser Rodgers, and he's got a lot of hats for the Penticton Vees, in fact, as the current Vice President of Business Operations, Director of Broadcast Communications, and Public Relations as well. Started out with the Vees back in 2011. Fraser, thanks so much for taking the time to join us here on the Two Goal Lead podcast, presented by BCHL Network.
Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
So you've called games and been around some of the best Penticton teams ever. This one this season is in first place in the Interior Conference and in the BCHL. Where does this season's club rank among the best you've seen?
Wow, loaded question coming off the bat, coming out hot. I like it. Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's funny you asked that. It's a question we get a lot lately in Penticton, especially since the Christmas break when this team's really, found that extra gear, so to speak, and, have the dominant record they do have with all the stats and the goals and goals against and the winning and the offense being spread out like it has been. I think for what I've seen, over 12 years on and off in Penticton, I would say this team's up there right now, regular season wise, maybe the best, even better than 2012. You just look at the win percentage right now at .930, I believe it was. And we still have 5 games to go in 2012 regular season. I think the win percentage was around .917, .918 for that 2012 team. So we just have to give this year's version based on just the stats person, the stats geek. You want to compare them. I think you'd have to give the regular season V's right now, this year's version, the slight edge, but you would judge your team on the playoffs. So with all that said, I think we still have to wait and see once the Fred Page Cup playoffs wrap up in May where this team does end up. But it's safe to say it's going to be a top 2 team in franchise history based on what's trending, if not the number 1 team come the end of May.
Now, there's obviously a lot of attention on V's forwards, Bradley Nadeau, Aidar Suniev, because they're ranked by NHL Central Scouting for this year's draft and in the top 2 rounds, in Nadeau's case, first round. Who on the V's has maybe flown under the radar a little bit for you that you've been impressed with this season?
That's a great question because, like you said, the Nadeau brothers and Aidar Suniev, and rightfully so, they get a lot of credit for the numbers this season they've had so far for the team, and those numbers really pop out. But I think there's some guys in the back end that do a lot of heavy lifting that kind of go unnoticed, and you need those guys to have championship teams. And I'm going to kind of go out in left field for some average listeners and, the average fan and say guys like Mason Poolman, 20-year-old defenseman, on the back end, Owen Simpson. Maybe these guys don't have the crazy stats, but what I remember in 2012, Brian, was that team would never win a championship if it wasn't for defensemen like Kyle Boyu, Zach Irvin, DJ Jones, these really good foot soldiers that played a depth role, played hard minutes, knew their role on the depth chart and played it so well. And that's so important for championship success. I think at any level of hockey in any sport, winning teams always say it's about knowing the role that you have and embracing that role. And Fred Harbison's touched on that a few times when talking about the success as this team as a group. It's all about the guys' buy-in factor and everyone's bought in. And I think those are the types of players that are the ones that are the X factors. Jackson Nieuwendyke's another one I think that needs a lot more credit, to another veteran player that's now playing between the Nadeau brothers on the top line. He's been nearly a point per game guy since joining them. And I know it's not hard, people think, to play with the Nadeaus, but it is hard to play with them because they're such highly intelligent, highly skilled players. They play at a different speed than the average players. You have to be on your toes and thinking at a high rate of speed and really thinking the game well to keep up with the Nadeau brothers on any shift on any given night. So there's some older guys. Yeah. I want to reiterate, Mason Poolman, the Owen Simpsons, these veteran defensemen that play hard minutes, the Jackson Nieuwendykes, and guys like Spencer Smith up front, another 20-year-old that, plays a lot of hard work in the trenches, I like to call it. Plays a lot of penalty killing, plays against the other team's top line. And those guys are usually the X factors come playoff time. When you talk about championship success, are these players that are just bred to play playoff hockey, and the guys I mentioned are kind of those types of players.
You mentioned it a little bit there, but over the years, the Vees have been able to almost score at will, including this season. But the team is also always near the top in terms of goals against. In talking with President, GM, and head coach Fred Harbinson, who you mentioned there, and being around these players, how much pride do they put in the defensive side of their game?
I think Fred puts more pride in defense than offense. I know you might raise your eyebrow when I say that, because his teams typically are known to be always the top offensive teams in the league and always have one of the top power plays, right? And in any given year, the Vees under Fred have been a top 3, top 5 power play team at worst, and typically a top 3 to top 5 offensive team at worst, right? So when I say defensive pride is probably his biggest attribute, or the biggest thing he takes pride in, is the defensive side of the game. I think it really surprises people. But if you're around Fred or you talk to him, away from the rink and talked about team success, he always says it starts in your own zone. Like any coach says, it starts how you play away from the puck, and the rest follows suit. Like Fred doesn't say, like he says, he doesn't really coach offense too much. He coaches a system for forechecking. Likes the guys though to be pretty creative and pretty open with how they produce offense. He really though prides on the defensive side of things, and you saw it last year, that Vees team that won the Fred Page Cup. Maybe not the most prolific offensive team, but they were so good defensively. Every line, every D pairing, great goaltending, of course, with Caden Lane in that, but they took a lot of pride away from the puck. And when you talk to other teams around the league, they say the biggest attribute the Vees have isn't the offense or what they do on the power play. It's actually the work ethic and commitment to detail on the defensive side of things, because they play you so hard defensively, and that's what frustrates, I think, teams the most, is just how good this team is away from the puck. And if they lose it, they want it right back, and they will not stop until they get that puck back from you. And that's an underlying factor for any team's success at any level of hockey, is what you do away from the puck. And you see all those good teams in the NHL that won Stanley Cups recently, Colorado, Tampa Bay, you think of their offense, and rightfully so, but those teams are so good away from the puck, so good at defending a lead, so good at defending in their own zone in crunch time. That's how you win championships. And that's no mistake here. You look at the goals against the Vees have, it's still not even cracked 90 this year. And we're at game, 50 coming up this weekend by the time we record this podcast. And this team wants to set the goals against record. And they're on pace to do it right now, Brian. Actually, if you look at their average goals against, they can set a new record for fewest goals against in a BCHL average goals against, because you can't really judge the actual number based on the fluctuation of schedules over the years. But yeah, sure. To give you a long-winded answer, the defensive side of thing, I think he takes the most pride in.
Now, of all the new recruits and acquisitions that Harbinson has made since last June, so now we're not looking at anybody who is a returning player for the Vees, which do you think has benefited the team the most?
Oh, that's a great question. Is it that's a really tough one to answer. What's benefited the most since I've come in? The acquisitions have been few and far between, because we had such a good carryover from this year, from last year, I should say.
Or a recruit. Could be a recruit.
Okay, could be a recruit. Yeah, the Nick DeGraves one, you see that one, because that's really the only major trade the team has had this year, when they traded Ethan Mann to Trail in a 3-team deal that eventually saw Nick DeGraves come from the Brooks Bandits, the Alberta Junior Hockey League. I think that's one that you just look at and go, okay, that's a very solid veteran player. But maybe the most obvious one is Luca DePasqua with net, because they got him to be potentially the number 1 this year. Colin Purcell was still on that time track to be coming back as a returning goaltender, and it was up to it's going to be between Purcell and DePasqua to fight for that number 1 job, or maybe have a tandem goaltending situation this year. But unfortunately, Purcell had to stop playing due to a long-term injury that he suffered last year. But you look at Luca DePasqua, I think he's exceeded expectations rather, from what his recruiting status was. We knew that he was going to be a solid junior goaltender playing in the North American Hockey League last year, but I think he's exceeded the expectations of how good he's been for this team. People will say Luca plays in front of a really good defensive team, so his stats can be inflated, but you still need to stop the puck when they fire pucks at you. And he's done a great job of being just a very clutch goaltender, and he's an excellent puck player, which is a great X factor for the V's team that likes to transition the puck so much and play with that transition offense. He could be a real weapon back there, and the way he can dish the puck off to defensemen and start the rush. But he's just really calm and composed goaltender. His mental game is something that I haven't seen in quite some time at the junior level, how much pride he takes in that mental focus. And he has a very detailed routine, what he does and how he prepares for games. He's very professional. He's one of the best conditioned athletes I've ever seen in junior hockey, period, outside of goaltending any position. He's a physical specimen off the ice. He's built like a football player. I know he's committed to Michigan State. He might be able to walk on and be a fullback at Michigan State when he goes there, because he's just that big of a guy. He's got massive legs and big upper bodies. He's built like a football player, and he's such a great attitude too. So probably that's the biggest acquisition, just based on his body work, what he's done. And the Vees didn't know exactly where their goaltending was going to be. You know, you graduate a couple goaltenders, Sirianko and Caden Lane, to schools, and then Purcell then has to suddenly stop playing junior hockey due to injuries. You're down to, one goalie at one point, Luca DePasquo, before they made the Hank Levy trade. And I think he's exceeded expectations big time for this team.
So Fred Harbinson signed an extension with the Vees in February, keeps him in Penticton through at least the 28-29 season. When that contract ends, he will have been in the Peach City more than 2 decades. After everything the Vees have accomplished on his watch, what do you think continues to drive Fred to excellence?
That's a great question too, Brian. You've done your homework. I can tell. It's a great question. That's one thing that even internally you would talk about and ask him. What keeps you hungry? And I've asked him that before when he signed the contract a few weeks ago. I asked him in an interview we did on our YouTube page. Hey, like, what keeps you coming back for more? And I think it's a legacy thing. He really prides himself on that legacy factor and what he's going to leave behind once he finally decides to retire from coaching the Vees or move on to a different venture in hockey. Is what's the foundation, what's the legacy he leaves behind, and how he's built this program up. Because I don't think a lot of people understand how involved he is, off the ice. Is like he's really built this program, not just recruiting players, but recruiting an environment of success to make those players who they are and help them develop for the next level. And it takes more than just coaching. It's the dressing room setup, the state-of-the-art facility they have here, and how he's had a big hand in getting renovations made to make this facility, the Vees hockey operations area in the building, where it is today, with a video room and an updated weight room, and constantly, improving the player experience, so to speak. And on the business side too, he really wants to see this team succeed off the ice, and has a vested interest in, making sure fans feel like they're, really part of this team as well. And I know it's not a community-owned team, but that's the feeling. He wants us to drive home on the business side, is making sure this team is entrenched into the community. So I think what keeps him hungry is just building and giving back, to this community what it's given him, him and his family. Obviously the success he's had here, the job security, the legacy that he's built here. And I think he feels like he's obligated in a good way to give back and keep, building what he's built here. And I think that's going to be the end. His legacy is when he retires from coaching is, how big is that statue going to be, for one, outside the SWC? Am I right? Like, geez. Yeah. And then two is like, what do you think of Penticton? And you're going to think of, what he's built here. I think him and he talked about the ownership group. He makes sure right away. He talks about Graham and Sue Fraser and the group that owns this team and what they've given him the opportunity to succeed here. And I think he really just is hungry to make their investment and, and their faith in him, the most worthwhile venture as well. And I think he just really prides himself on developing players. It's neat to see the relationship he has with a lot of the alumni, constantly phoning him or texting or stopping by in the summer. I don't know how many times I've seen in my return here in just, the last few months, how many alumni have come through with their wives or their parents or girlfriends and family, and, on visits, and made sure to come back to Penticton if they're in the Okanagan to say hi to Fred and show them the SWC, right? And so I think he prides himself on that, network he's built here as well, with all the alumni and that legacy as well.
You've had the privilege of seeing a lot of outstanding players during your time in the BC Hockey League since 2011. Who's the best player you've ever seen in a Vees jersey?
This is a $1 million question, isn't it? I don't want to get in trouble from other alumni going to DM me now on Twitter. if I don't mention them, they're going to get mad. That's a great question. I think, it's the league has evolved so much as well since 2011. You know that. You followed this league longer than I have, and the quality of play is probably nowhere near, or it hasn't been any better than it has been now. It's been,
Mhm.
really interesting how much the league has grown with recruiting, players from back east or in the US, and how much the quality of play has improved since 2011. You really don't have, players that don't belong in this league. Everybody's a highly skilled player that, belongs to the junior A level, and that's great to see. So it does make this question even tougher now than it was maybe back in 2011 or 2012. But I think Josh and Bradley Nadeau, what they've done in Penticton in just 2 short years, has to be considered, top 5 players of all time in Penticton Vees history. And I posed that to Fred a few days ago. Just we're chatting before a game. I said, "Where do these guys have to be? Top 5, top 3 players at this point, don't they?" And he goes, "Yeah, they got to be in that conversation. They're what they've done is nothing but exceptional." And
And that's a
you
list.
have,
That's a list that includes Brett Hull and Ray
uh
Ferraro and Andy
yeah,
Moog and Duncan
I know.
Keith and Paul Correa.
Yeah, like he says, like they're top players, like especially in his time, and you have to make that argument of Penticton junior hockey history. Those guys are top 5 potential players. Just what they've done, and especially if this team can repeat this year, who knows? Playoffs are a completely different animal, but if they can repeat and they're 2-time champions and potential MVP of the leagues, one of them are going to be probably one of the leading scorers. One of them is going to be probably named an MVP. You have to give them that respect. But what I've seen in myself, I can't talk about those legends you listed off, but those two have to be considered one of the 2 all-time greats. And on another individual note, Mike Gartag back in 2012, I got to I was fortunate to be with him for 2 straight years in Powell River, then in Penticton, and I'd never seen a goalie dominate a league like he did in my time in the BCHL. Just the shutouts and the wins, the save percentage, and just the success he had in 2 years with Powell River and Penticton was pretty phenomenal. There's other goalies that maybe are trying to make that case now, but I still thought he was just one of the most clutch goalies in my time in BCHL history. So, they're up there, and they talked about the Nadeau brothers. And, one guy I have to say that, I'd be remiss not to mention is Troy Stetcher. I know he's, plays NHL still, and that's a huge accomplishment given his background. Undersized, undervalued defenseman, no matter what level he was playing at growing up. He never got that fair shake in Richmond or, in minor hockey in the Lower Mainland. And he comes to Penticton, not heavily recruited, I would say. Had a chance to go to Portland, the WHL, but Penticton took a chance on him at 16. They obviously saw something there, and then Troy Stetcher became one of the best defensemen of his time in the BCHL. And it's not points wise, like Mike Riley had some dynamic points, but Troy Stetcher, one of the best natural leaders I've ever seen in junior hockey. When a mature kid at 16 and 17 and 18 years old, and just what he did, he'd play sometimes 30, 35 minutes in a playoff game, played hurt. One of the best stories, I know I'm going long here, but against Surrey in the 2013 Fred Page Cup final, he had a separated shoulder after game 1 and was not supposed to play game 2 the next night in Surrey. Probably was not supposed to play the rest of the series. And then Fred said, okay, we're going to announce that he's out due to an injury, and then, that will be it. I said, okay. So we get to the rinking game 2, and Troy, being Troy, Brian, convinces Fred to let him at least take warm-up. I mean, his arm is like taped together. It's dangling there. So Dan McDowell, the trainer at the time, has to, tape up his arm, and he goes, let me just take warm up. Let me take warm up. So he goes out for warm up, and I go, oh, okay. He's going out there for morale, right? A little morale boost for the team before game 2 against Surrey. And, all of a sudden, it's 7:00. The anthem's about to start, and then he's on the blue line, standing there. Troy Stetcher. I'm like, what is going on? There's no way he's playing. He separated his shoulder last night. And sure enough, he played 35 minutes that night. And I know they lost by a goal that night to Surrey and eventually lost the series, but just from an individual toughness standpoint, it's one of the best stories I recall. So I put, Troy Stetcher, Mike Gartag, and the Doe brothers in that Mount Rushmore so far in my time in Penticton.
Okay, now I'm going to flip things on you. Who's the best opposing player you've ever seen in the BCHL?
Oh, yeah, that's a great one, because there's been some really good players in this league that I've got to see, play at a high level in the BCHL. I think, Devon Toews is one that jumps off the page for me. Speaking of that 2013 Fred Page Cup, which was a fantastic series that had so much star power in it for junior A level, I think he was just a stud. And you saw him back then and, didn't have a ton of, publicity about him, but you knew he was a special player because he was that series version of Troy Stetcher I just talked about, played so much, played with so much composure, went off to college and then, Colorado, or ends up in Colorado, plays the New York Islanders, works his way into the Islanders lineup, then becomes this, bona fide NHL defenseman, and now he's a Stanley Cup champion and a key piece in that Colorado Avalanche blue line because, he's just that type of X factor defenseman that plays so well and he's so calm. And, all the analytics talk about just how great of a player he is defensively and the puck possession type of player. And watching him against the Vees in that final in 2013, he really jumps out as a guy that was, you knew he was going to do something special at the next level, either college or pro, if he eventually got there. So he was one that kind of jumps out to me, always just talking about a pro's pro and a guy that was going to be special to play against. And I guess, in that same breath, that series, Michael Santaguida, 5'7" goaltender, maybe stole Surrey that Great Pitch Cup final, the way he played. He was excellent, and to see an undersized goalie have that dominant of a season in a playoff run, it was pretty special as well. But probably Devon Toews, I would say, is one of the best players I got to see outside of a V sweater in the BCHL.
So you returned to Penticton last summer after 5 seasons in the Western Hockey League with Prince George. How has the season back in the Okanagan gone personally for you thus far?
Well, pretty good, isn't it? Like 45 win season for this team and great fan base here. Can't really complain about the transition coming back to Penticton. And first and foremost, for my family, super happy, to raise our family here and live in the South Okanagan again. It's such a special community, Brian. I know you've been here a bunch before in the BCHL. You've been in the SVC and know how, special of a place this building is for the junior A level. And just taking away the business side is, living here and the summers that you get here, the springs you get here, and the tight-knit community that really supports the team. And you really feel special as a member of this organization when you're out and about in the community. It's not the recognition you want, or you look for, but it's nice to know people care about this team and care about you and your family so much. I don't know how many times I've been stopped, since I come back, and people have been very flattering to welcome me and my family back to Penticton. I just don't know if you get that a lot in another junior hockey market in BC where the team is, this closely followed to, that degree where the broadcaster even gets, a pat on the back when he comes back to town. And I mean that in the most humbling way. And on the business side, it's been great to really dive into, help grow the business, learn the business side of hockey, and meet so many good people in the marketing business side of BCHL that, are behind the scenes and don't get a lot of recognition. And it's great working with those people again, Barry Douglas's in Chilliwack to David Michaud, in Alberni Valley, really strong business acumen, people that can really, lean on and learn from. And when you're talking in these marketing meetings you have for the BCHL, and to be back in Penticton and just be around these fans again and around the energy in the building and all the buzz that you get this time of year close to the playoffs, it's something special, and pretty fortunate to be along for what should be a great ride this playoffs as well.
Did you have any lessons that you learned in the WHL that you're applying now that you're back in the BCHL?
Learning how to, work with little sleep, maybe that's parenthood too. You can speak to that. Once you have
That's
kids,
parenthood. Absolutely.
That's parenthood. Yeah. You just don't sleep. So WHL's, I think working that league, it's such a big machine in the sense of like, it's a tough schedule, a lot of games and a lot of travel, and learning just to, manage your time, as efficiently as possible in the media world. It's a busy world with the WHL and the media side of things. And there's a lot of demands on you when you work for a team like Prince George because of the travel is so significant. So you spend so much time on the road and trying to juggle, multiple hats, so to speak, and wear multiple hats. So yeah, I think, and then one thing, it kind of sounds maybe sentimental, but learning to, appreciate your time at home when working in a league like that or working in junior hockey, when you're at home and maximizing that time with your family that you can get away from the game. It's so important to turn off the hockey brain and be refreshed and sharp and not be burnt out when the seasons get so demanding and so long and so busy. Because, coming up in the next few weeks is the busiest time of year when it comes to playoffs and the demand and expectations that come with that. So probably learning, just appreciating time with the family, appreciating my time away from the rink, recharging those batteries. I'm not getting any younger, getting older. So probably my biggest lesson too is trying to take care of that side of things and enjoy the small victories along the way as well when it comes to, team success or the business success, or just enjoying, being part of one of the great junior leagues in Canada.
Now, many broadcasters look at going from junior A to major junior as a step up in their career. You made that move 2017. Now you're back in Penticton. You mentioned it a little bit there, but I want you to elaborate maybe. What was your thought process in coming back to the BCHL?
Yeah, it's a great question because a lot of people, their next step is when you come out of broadcasting school, like yourself, when you work at BCIT, a very established program that you've developed a great program there on the sports broadcasting side, and they always
Thanks.
want to climb that ladder and get to that next level, quote unquote. And I've had a few broadcasters ask me why I'd come back. They might think that's a bit different going from the Western League back to the BCHL, but for me, is more just Penticton's such a unique animal here, where it's not run just like a junior team or a major junior team. It's run like a professional team. It's a professional atmosphere, like I just touched on about the fan base and the passion here and the business community supporting it and just everything that goes into a Penticton V here. It's so unique and so professional. And I know one person on the weekend mentioned this. Just I was talking to a building manager at the SWC, and he said it's first class organization. He says, I worked for NHL teams, I worked NBA teams, and the V's are one of the classiest organizations among all those teams he mentioned. That was a pretty flattering compliment. I thought it kind of stuck with me. It's true. Like, working here is you're not working quote unquote junior A. You're working with the Penticton Vees. They have a recognition that goes right across North America, no matter what level hockey you're talking about. You can talk with guys in the NHL, people in the Western Hockey League, OHL, QMJHL, AHL, doesn't matter. You mentioned Penticton, they know exactly the program and what it entails. So I think that's the thing that led me to come back here, is to, grow the business side and learn something completely different, working morely on the business side, not just on the media relations broadcasting side, and developing that, skill set. And I think this league has come leaps and bounds in growth, both on and off the ice, since I left, even in 2017. And I always followed the BCHL quite closely, even when I was working in the WHL. I still have a lot of friends in this league and people I'd reach out to. I remember reaching out to you periodically once in a while as well, and having conversations online. And to be part back, I don't see it as a quote unquote step down, as some might. And they just see the leagues. I think it's a league that's going in a really good direction, led by Chris Hebb and Steve Cocker at the league office and their team there. And the board of governors have a great vision for this league long term, which I think there's a lot of exciting things in the pipeline. That's some good foreshadowing I'm giving you there. So that's some cookie crumbs. There's some breadcrumbs there for you.
Mm-hmm,
No, I feel like Penticton is in a great spot, and it's a great place to work. And I just feel like it kind of stars all align. Just a rambling on here, but it has made a lot of sense for me and my family to kind of put roots down here. And if I want to work in hockey long term, this is the place to do it.
Growing up, who was your broadcast role model?
That's it. It's funny. Like, a lot of guys would always gravitate to maybe, Jim Robson and John Shorthouse, Rick Ball in Vancouver. And certainly, as a kid growing up in Nanaimo, you saw a lot of Vancouver Canucks on TV. And that was certainly the case. I think, I always kind of gravitated towards the radio side a little bit more at a younger age. It was so prevalent when I was getting interested into radio broadcasting. There was so much radio broadcasting, either, Team 1040 radio and CKNW with Dan Russell. But I think, Jim Houston, when I was younger on the radio side, a lot of people don't remember Jim Houston, the radio broadcaster. A lot of people remember Jim Houston as a Canucks TV play-by-play voice. And he eventually became that as well. But he was actually on CKNW as play-by-play radio for a bit. I remember listening to some games with Jim Houston and John Shorthouse, those types of players. But, there's other sports I kind of gravitated towards too. Was baseball was a big influence when it came to broadcasting. And when I was younger, you heard guys like Dan Schulman on, and TSN used to air the Blue Jays games with Buck Martinez back in the day. And I think Dan Schulman's still regarded as one of the best broadcasters in baseball, in sports in general. So he's someone, but I don't think there's anyone in particular. Bob Cole is always a great influence. Chris Cuthbert, the people at Hockey Night in Canada. I always felt like I was a bit of a, someone that took pieces from several different broadcasters and tried to, learn from so many different ones and listen to their games. Maybe not one specific person, I was really focused on a lot. I know actually, looking in Nanaimo too, like I remember, younger days in Nanaimo, like listening to broadcasters there. I think, Cam Moonway at one point was in Nanaimo doing the Nanaimo Clippers. And I remember as a kid on CHLY, the college radio station, he was back in the 90s, listening to Cam Moon. I remember listening to a lot of Cam Moon, the Nanaimo Clippers broadcast. Now Cam's going to text me and say, yeah, I'm making him feel really old right now. But
Of course.
that's someone when I was a kid in Nanaimo, listened to a lot, learned a lot from Patrick Selecki. Pat Selecki was a great BCHL broadcaster and WHL broadcaster. He's now out of broadcasting in general, but I remember when I first got into radio broadcasting in Nanaimo, Pat was working at the same station in Nanaimo that I started out at. It's a very green community events person, and he took a lot of time to answer my probably annoying questions about sports play-by-play broadcasting. And Pat was very gracious at this time, and he was a great influence. And so was, I know, a friend of yours, Dan Marshall, great person to chat with when I met him in Nanaimo as well, cross paths with him in the broadcasting world. He really helped me a lot. So probably to answer your question, again, long-winded, I'd say more at the local level, guys like Camoon, Pat Lecky, even Dan Marshall, still going strong with Nanaimo Clippers are great influences on my broadcasting career.
So as a play-by-play announcer, what traits do you look for in a color commentator to be beside you in the booth?
That's another great question. I think the best, commentators, they don't tell you what is happening, and they tell you why it's happening. I think that's the best advice I got, from a guy like Al Forma, who is a legendary broadcaster in Penticton and then recently inducted into the Ring of Honor this season, did 40 plus years of radio broadcasting for Penticton Junior Hockey. Is, painting that picture. You talk about painting a picture on radio broadcasting in general in sports, but I always feel like the play-by-play guy outlines the picture, so to speak, draws the picture, and the color person literally colors it in with detail. And I think a great color commentator explains why a play happened, how that goal happened, leading up to that goal, and in a good detail explaining why that's happening is very, very beneficial for the listener. It makes a really good radio broadcast. And not necessarily agreeing all the time. It's great to have differing opinions on a broadcast between a play-by-play broadcaster and a color commentator about what they saw. Why'd you see it this way? I saw it this way. That's always makes, I think, for good theater, in my opinion, to have two, not necessarily going at each other and duking it out in the booth, but having a civilized conversation, maybe varying viewpoints on a game. But I think that the essential thing for a good color commentator at any level in any sport is telling the listener why plays are unfolding. Either it's a goal for or a penalty in hockey, touchdown football. Talking about basketball and how that a certain player has so many points. It's why it's happening, not what is happening, not just repeating what the play-by-play broadcaster says.
What advice do you have for someone who's looking to get into play-by-play?
Be a sponge, ask a lot of questions, talk to a lot of people, but most importantly is just have a strong work ethic. I know a lot of it does start with volunteer work. That's the best work. I started as a volunteer, when I was a teenager. I was 18, 19, getting into broadcasting in Nanaimo, and just volunteering, asking, just to do everything and anything, and just really having a strong work ethic. You're going to have to put in a lot of, grunt work, so to speak, a lot of long hours at lower levels, and work for probably multiple teams, and, have, wear a lot of hats with those teams to make it all work, and just have that self-belief too. I think that's important with any job. If you're going to be successful, is believing in your own skill set and, being confident in your abilities. Because if you're not confident, that's going to, rub off. People are going to smell it on you, so to speak. That's what some great advice people told me in the past is, people can smell your confidence. If you don't have it, you reek like bad confidence, you're not going to, sell yourself to a team or an organization to be their play-by-play broadcaster. And it's going to show in your work, either on TV or radio. The listener is going to know that you're not, confident in what you're saying or believe in what you're saying. So I think self-confidence, just a really good work ethic, never being, too shy to ask a question. No questions, a dumb question, in my opinion, when it comes to broadcasting, and asking, veteran people in the business, any question you have, and getting, feedback. And I guess, and one thing, I don't know if you might be able to answer this on I'm answering the questions now, but you might be able to ask this. Yeah, is like, I think, feedback on air checks, air checks, getting your broadcasting, critique professionally is so important. And I know there's a lot of colleagues of mine that do it. I'm probably guilty of not doing it enough at this point in my career, but, getting air check from, established people that you respect is very important.
So the Vees are notable for a lot of reasons around the world, but the team went viral in October 2014. Former Canucks anthem singer Mark Donnelly skating around the ice at the SOEC performing O Canada. He trips on the red carpet, falls to the ice. Yep. Can you describe how all that unfolded from your perspective? You were in the booth, and then also as the Vees director of communications at the time.
Yeah, no, that was so big promotion. Mark Donnelly at the time was at the height of his, singing career, if you will, with the Canucks, and doing the, famous Canucks playoff anthems. Is, I don't know if a lot of people knew, he was kind of like the ringer for the playoffs. Canucks would bring him in for those big playoff runs and big playoff games, and he was kind of like their lucky charm. And, he got the crowd going with his, his a cappella version of "O Canada," where he would kind of let the crowd take over and he would not stop singing and had that great opera baritone voice. And it was promotion through a local sponsor and a local investor in the team. Neil Jameson wanted to bring him up and have him sing the anthem. So that was, a big publicity for this team at the time, because he was a big name and that was a big deal. And it was generating a lot of buzz, but it was funny. Like, he wanted to go on the ice. He was so determined to be, I want to skate around during the anthem for this night. And I remember having my battles leading up to that week with Neil in the office, and me and him arguing loudly and shouting, almost saying, "Neil, this can't happen. It could be a disaster. He could wipe out, or he could fall and hit his head and sue us. We would be broke." And Neil luckily worked in the insurance agency. He had an insurance business in town. He knew all the ins and outs on how to make sure everything was taken care of. And so, I didn't obviously get the final say, being just the communications person at the time. So sure enough, you fast forward to that night, and the carpet gets put out there, for the puck drop that was about to happen that night. There was a ceremonial puck drop after the anthem. And I thought that was going to be a bit strange. I was in the booth in the corner there, as you know, and I saw that carpet. I saw the teams come out, and the lights went out, the house lights went out, and they wanted to have the spotlight of him skating around. And I said, okay, I think he'll be fine as long as he can see, the carpet. He should be okay. But it was dark, and when those house lights go off and then you have a spotlight on you, if you ever emceed an event and have a spotlight on you, it's blinding. You can't see around you. All you can see is maybe a couple feet in front of you. So sure enough, the anthem carpet was put out too early, unfortunately. And it was the red carpet at center ice, and he starts skating around and singing. And I knew right away, he was skating towards me, from our position, our broadcast in the southeast corner of the building. He was going to hit the carpet. You just knew it, because he was looking around, looking at the fans and, gesturing with his hands like he always does with the anthem. And then I knew it was disaster. As we were playing Salmon Arm, players and the Vees players were laughing and burying their chins in their shoulder pads, trying not to show, stifle their laughter. But I know I almost had a sick feeling to my stomach, because I thought about one injury and not be able to get back up after, going head first over the carpet. But he somehow, managed to get up and sing and finish in the anthem. And two, after I knew he wasn't seriously hurt, was, how much trouble I'm going to be in for this, moment falling on the ice. And, is Fred going to take a pound of flesh off me and yell at me, or is Neil? And it turns out it was great publicity for the league and the Vees. And the thing went viral. We had talk shows, I kid you not, Brian, from Germany and Japan, these TV shows requesting footage. It was about 2 straight weeks of these constant emails and phone calls from across the world wanting to share that viral clip. And it's something I'll never forget, for sure.
And now it's been viewed on YouTube more than 3 million times. So definitely some eyeballs.
It's crazy. It's too bad we didn't have him wearing a ticket T-shirt or something, or, a way to buy season tickets on that suit of his. It would have been great.
Hey, Fraser, I really appreciate you doing this, and best of luck with the Vees for the rest of the season and into the playoffs.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it, and great to be on.
Wonderful stories and fantastic conversation with Fraser Rodgers, the Vice President of Business Operations for the Penticton Vees, as well as the Director of Broadcast, Communications, and Public Relations with the Penticton Hockey Club there at the South Okanagan Events Center. All right, that'll do it for episode number 9 of the 2 Goal Lead podcast presented by BCHL Network. My name is Brian Wiebe. I'm the owner and editor-in-chief of BCHL Network. Do appreciate you tuning in. Do appreciate you reading along. There's some great articles, by the way, before I go. Have to mention this at bchlnetwork.ca. In fact, there's a profile there that Chris Keck, one of the writers at BCHL Network, did on Fraser Rodgers. More about his return to the South Okanagan after his 5 years in the Western Hockey League. Do encourage you to check that out. As well, Clifford Hofford has done a couple of really solid articles. One about the relationship between Bentley University in the NCAA Division I and the Alberni Valley Bulldogs. Plus, Clifford also looks back at a blockbuster trade a couple months ago between the Cowichan Valley Capitals and the Alberta Junior Hockey League's Brooks Bandits. Those are 2 new articles right now up at bchlnetwork.ca. Do hope that you check them out. All right, the big episode, we hit double digits coming up next. And in fact, our next episode will feature a member of the Nanaimo Clippers. Do hope that you tune in for that as well. Like and subscribe the 2 Goal Lead podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, and on Stitcher. That'll do it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on episode number 10.